Correct. Good morning, students. So, welcome to the class 29. So, whether my screen is visible, am I audible? Anyone?
Yes, sir.
Okay, right, fine. So, welcome to the module 29, right? So, in the IC engine subject, so today we are entering into the unit 4, right? So, up to third unit, we have seen the lot of terms, right? So, for the first unit, we have seen what about the introduction about the IC engines, and for the second unit, we have seen about the petrol engines, and the third unit, we have seen about the diesel engines, right? But in the fourth unit, right, the fourth unit, the unit will be the cooling and the lubrication systems, cooling and the lubrication system, right? So that we can discuss in the fourth unit, right? Uh, right. So these are the content we have in the fourth unit, right? So for the fourth unit, we have two parts. One is the cooling part, and one more is the lubrication part, right? So first we start with the lubrication, right? First we start with the lubrications, right? So what are the terms there in the lubrications, right? So need for the lubrication and the lubricant for the IC engines, and what are the properties are there in the lubricants and types of the lubricants, right? And the systems, right? What are the types of lubrication systems will be there, right? So that we will discuss in the fourth unit, right? So the fourth unit will be divided into two terms, right? One is the lubrication part, and one more is the cooling part, right? Then just we see about uh, the introduction about the lubrication systems, right? So where the lubrication will be used, right, and why we have to use the lubrication, right? So that we have see here, right? So the lubrication can be considered a vital role, right? The lubrication can be considered as a vital role in any working parts, right? Any the working parts, or it may have some relative motion in the any type of machines, not only engines, right? So any type of machines, right? So the lubrication, it can be considered, right, as a very important one, right? So while designing the elements, the machine parts, right? So for the various bearings and gears, and for the cams, right? So which will make the machine or a engine, right? So we must consider, or we must consider while in the designing and the manufacturing of the machining elements, the machine components, right? So for the better material to meet the demands of the modern trends, right? So depending upon the modern trends, depending upon the modern high speed machines or a high speed production rate, right? So we have to design a machine component, right? Machine components, right, in a very good manner, that is while in the design as well as in the manufacturing term, right? So we have the two attributes. One is the design attributes, and one more is the manufacturing attributes, right? So we have to see both the terms, right? So design as well as the manufacturing attributes, right? So it will meet the demand of the modern production rates, right? So we have choose a better material, right? We have to choose a better material to meet the demands, right? So whatever may be the material we have chosen, right? So but without, that is without proper lubrication, right? So whatever may be the material we have used, right, so without the proper lubrication means it may get some wear, right? It may get some wear, and it may get some uh, rapid failures, right? So that will be a useless in the production tools, right? So we have to uh, stabilize that better life, right? We can get a better life in the machine components means surely we have to give some lubrication. Why? Because while in the moving parts, right? So while in the moving, all the machine elements are in the moving conditions, right? So it will have some relative motion between the elements, right? So surely what will happen? it will have some mating surfaces. It will have some mating surfaces, so it will rub to each other, right? So it will rub against the each other. So it may cause the frictional forces, right? It may cause some frictional forces. So due to the frictional forces, the heat may be generated, right? So the heat may be generated, and it will causes the wear in the mating surfaces or the relative motion of the components, right? So what will happen? There may be some power losses also there, right? So there maybe I have some power losses, right? So if the power will be more, so what will happen? And the time the frictional force also high, the frictional force also high between the mating surfaces or rubbing surfaces, right? So we have to reduce the power loss. We have to reduce the power loss, and we have to reduce the wear and tear on the machining components, the machine elements, right? So we have to introduce some lubrication terms, right? We have to introduce some lubrication terms, right? So that we have to see, right? That we have to see. So the lubrication system is a very important one, right? The lubrication system is a very important one, right? So while in the any type of machine or any type of engine, it may have a lot of um, mating surfaces, or it may have there is lot of the relative motion between the components, machine elements, right? So it will have some wear and tear, right? So it may have some wear and tear, and it will develop more frictional forces. So due to the frictional forces, the heat may also increases, right? So these factors will cause the power loss. So the power loss will cause
சாருக்கு நெட் ப்ராப்ளமாடா?
ஆமாண்டா, அவரு வெளில போயிட்டாரு.
ஓகே ஓகே. நான் என் ஹெட்செட் போயிடுச்சுன்னு நினைச்சிட்டு இருக்கேன். சரி ஓகே ஓகே.
Oh, sorry for the inconvenience, students. So whether my screen is visible?
No, sir.
No, no, wait. இப்ப தெரியுதாப்பா?
இல்ல சார். இப்போ
தெரியுதா?
எஸ் சார்.
Okay, right. Okay. So the lubrication system is very important one, right? So the lubrication. What is the lubrication, and what are the needs of need for the lubrication, right? So that we have to see, right? So the lubrication, right? So where and all the lubrication will be used, right? So we in the engine parts, not only engine parts, in any machine component, any machine, right? So any machine, we have more mating surfaces, and we have some relative motion between the elements, right? So we have to use the lubrication. Why? Because for the better characteristics to determine the service of the engine life, right? So the lubrication is very very important one, right? So right, then what are the functionals of the lubricating systems, right? So I already told that, right? So why we have to use, right, the lubricants, right? Why we have to use the lubricants, right? So the lubricants will reduce us, right? The lubricant will reduce us the friction between the moving parts, right? So the lubricant will reduces the friction between the moving parts, and it will reduces the wear and tear of the moving parts, and it will minimize the power loss due to the friction, right? It will minimize the power loss due to the friction, right? So the providing the cooling effect also, right? It will providing the cooling effect while the lubricating, right? While the lubricating, it also carries some the heat. It will also carry some heat, right? So from the engine, right? From the engine or from the machine surfaces, right? So it will deliver to the surrounding also, right? It will deliver to the sorry, it will carry the heat from the engine parts, and it will be delivered to the surrounding, right? So it will helps to reduce the noise also, right? It will reduce the noise also, right? So these are all the main functions. These are all the main functions, right? So here you can see that it will reduces the power, right? It will reduces the power required to overcome the friction by providing the lubrication, and it will reduce the wear, and it will reduce the wear, right? So when we have to reduce the wear means the where the wear will be producing, right? So the rubbing surfaces, right? So there only the wear will be producing, right? Then it will increase the power output, right? It will increase the power output and the service life. If we are using the lubrication, we can get the better output, better power output, and the better life of the engine components, right? And the lubrication, it is also a part of a cooling one, right? So it is also work as the coolant, right? So it will carries the heat which will be developed by the friction. It will be developed by the friction from the machine components, right? From the machine components, and it will be delivered to the surrounding. It will be delivered to the surrounding, right? So that's the second one. Then the third one, it is work as a cleaner, right? It is work as a cleaner, right? So while we have some rubbing surfaces, we have some rubbing surfaces or a mating surfaces, or we have some relative motion between the machine components, right? So there we can get some contaminants, right? We can get some contaminants on the uh, parts, right? So due to the wear, so due to the wear, we can get some contamination parts in the, or for the engines, right? For the engines while burning, so we can get some carbonized terms, right? We can get some carbonized terms, so the dust will be occurring, right? So we have to clear that unwanted terms, right? We have to clear that unwanted terms. So the lubricant will clear that terms also, right? So it will act as a cleaner also, right? Then it will form the good seal, right? It will form good seal between the piston rings and the cylinder, piston rings and the cylinder wall, right? So it will providing the lubricating film on the cylinder's wall, right? And it will reduces the engine noise and the vibration, right? So due to the vibration, what will happen? The engine noise will be increases, right? So that vibration will be reduces, and the noise also reduces, right? So these are all the functional terms in the lubricating system, right? So first you can see we have to, so first we can see this one, right? So it is work as a coolant, and it is work as the cleaner, and it will form a good seal between the piston rings and the cylinder walls, right? Piston rings and the cylinder walls, right? Then it will reduces the noises, right? It will reduces the noises, right? So where the noise will be producing, right? So due to the vibration of the terms, right? So the noise will be producing, so it will be reduces the noise, right? So these are all the functional terms in the lubricating system, right? So these are all the functional terms in the lubricating system, right? Is it clear? Is it clear? Anyone?
Yes, sir.
Okay, right, fine. So in the fourth unit, right? So the fourth unit, it's a very simple one, right? So we didn't require more classes, right? So within 4 to 5 class, we can complete this unit, right? Within 4 to 5 class, we can complete this unit, right? So all the topics will be a very smaller one and easier one, right? So then the engine parts, right? So which are lubricated, right? So engine parts which are the lubricated, right? So where and all the lubrication will be there, right? So you see the diagram and answer me. You see this diagram and answer. So where and all the here the orange color, so these are all indicated as the lubricant. This also indicated as a lubricant. So where the lubricant will be passing through the engine. Narration, are you there? Narration, you see the diagram and answer me. Where and all the you just simply see the diagram and answer. Narration. So narration was absent. Okay, right. Then
ஸோ சேட் பாக்ஸில் மெசேஜ் பண்ணுங்க.
chat box message பண்ணீங்களா? Okay, right. So narration, just answer. So you see the diagram, right? So in the engine parts, right? So where and all the lubrication will be goes, and which are the parts are getting the lubricant. You see the engine parts. So have you seen this diagram? இந்த diagram எல்லாருக்கும் தெரியுதா?
எஸ் சார், தெரியுது சார்.
Right. So where the lubricant will be goes, from where to where, and what are the components, what are the parts, engine parts will get this lubricant.
ஃப்ரிக்ஷன் எங்கெல்லாம் அக்கறாதோ அங்க.
Okay, right. You see the diagram and answer, that's all. அதுலயே வந்து ஆரோ மார்க்லாம் போட்டு நல்லாவே சொல்லியிருக்கிறாங்க எங்கெங்கதான் நம்மளுக்கு வந்து இருக்கு லூப்ரிகன்ட் போகுது அப்படின்னு. அதெல்லாம் நான் சைட்ல போட்டிருக்கேன் பாரு. So first term will be the crankshaft, right? So the crankshaft will get the lubricant, right? So இது வந்து ஒரு 2 mark question அவ்வளவுதான், right? It's a 2 mark question, right? So எந்த பார்ட்ல நமக்கு வந்து lubricant இருக்கும் அப்படின்றது, right? A simple 2 mark question, right? So the crankshaft, right? So இதுதான் என்ன சொல்லிருப்போம், the crank, right? So it is the crankshaft, right? It is the crankshaft, right? So which will rotates, right? So in the crankshaft என்ன கனெக்ட் பண்ணிருக்காங்க, this crankshaft, and it is a camshaft, right? It is the camshaft. Okay, இது என்னன்னு சொல்லிப்போம், இது வந்து camshaft, right? So crankshaft and camshaft, sorry, connecting rod, right? இதுதான் என்ன சொல்லிப்போம், this is connecting rod, and this is crankshaft, and this and all என்னது, the valves, right? So the inlet valve and the outlet valve, right? So the inlet valve and outlet valve will be operated by the cam operation, right? So we supply some lubricant on the cam, right? So by using the cam we have some rocker arm, right? So rocker arm அப்படின்னா பாத்துருக்கீங்களா? அது rocker arm, யாரா ராக்கர் ஆம் பாத்திருக்கியா? ஏதாவது ரிப்ளை பண்றீங்களா? ஜஸ்ட் வெயிட், நான் உனக்கு இன்னொரு டயக்ராம் ஒன்று போட்டு காட்டுறேன். ரைட், என்னோட ஸ்கிரீன் விசிபிளா இருக்காப்பா?
Yes, sir.
ரைட், இந்த அனிமேஷன் தெரியுதா?
தெரியுது சார்.
Okay, right, fine. So here you can see, so the oil, right? So here the oil sump will be there, right? So in the bottom of the cylinder, bottom of the engine, the oil sump will be there. So the oil will be pumps, right? The oil will be pumps by the rotor, G rotor. Right? So இது வந்து என்னது? ஒரு oil pump, right? It is the oil pump and it is the oil sump, right? Then இது என்னது? A filter, right? So the oil will be pumps and it will be filters and it will be goes to the engine, right? So here it is the rocker arm, right? Here it is a rocker arm, right? So இங்க உங்களுக்கு இந்த டயகிராம் தெரியுதா? right? So it is called the rocker arm, right? So you can see the valve எப்படி ஓபன் ஆகுது பாருங்களா, valve, right? So the rocker arm will be operated by this cam, right? So cam operating வரும்போது நமக்கு என்ன ஆகுது? இந்த ராக்கர் ராம் அப்படின்றது இன்லெட் வால்வ் ஓபன் பண்ணி விடுது அண்ட் க்ளோஸ் பண்ணி விடுது, ரைட்டா? சோ அதுதான் என்ன சொல்லிப்போம், ராக்கர் ஆர்ம், ரைட்டா? So we have to supply the lubricant to the rocker arm and the lubricant will be passing through the springs, ரைட்டா? So இந்த வால்வ்ஸ் இருக்கு இல்லையா, இந்த வால்வ்ஸோட ஸ்ப்ரிங்ல பாருங்க, இங்க நமக்கு வந்து ஸ்ப்ரிங் கிட்ட வரும், இந்த வால்வ்ல வந்து lubricant வரும், ரைட்டா? Then the lubricant will be passing through the crankcase, ரைட்டா? So இந்த crankcase வரும்போது நமக்கு என்ன ஆகுது? So இந்த crank rotation இருக்குல்ல, இந்த crank rotationல இருக்கும், ரைட்டா? So இது crank cam shaft, ரைட்டா? So இதான் சொல்லிப்போம் crank shaft, ரைட்டா? So the crank shaft will be connected by the connecting rod and the piston, ரைட்டா? So here இங்க கூட நமக்கு என்ன, இந்த piston வால்வ்ல பார்த்தோம்னா இந்த pistonல மேல வந்து ஒரு 3 டாட்ஸ் தெரியுது உங்களுக்கு. இந்த பிஸ்டன்ல பாருங்க, பிஸ்டன்ல சைடுல வந்து ஒரு 3 டாட்ஸ் தெரியுது, அதான் சொல்லிப்போம் பிஸ்டன் ரிங்ஸ் அப்படின்னு சொல்லியிருப்போம், கரெக்டா? அதான் சொல்லிப்போம் பிஸ்டன் ரிங்ஸ், ரைட்டா? ஸோ அந்த பிஸ்டன் ரிங்ஸ்ல நமக்கு வந்து இந்த ஆயில் வந்து ஸ்பிளாஷ் ஆகும், கரெக்டா? ஸோ இதுல இப்படிதான் நமக்கு வந்து ஆயில் வந்து மூவ்மெண்ட் இப்படிதான் இருக்கும், சிஸ்டம்ல வந்து ஒரு ஆயில் மூவ்மெண்ட் அப்படின்றது இந்த மாதிரிதான் இருக்கும், கரெக்டா? இது தெரிஞ்சா உங்களுக்கு இந்த ஒரு டயக்ராம்ல இதுல நமக்கு வந்து ரெண்டுமே இருக்கு, ரைட்டா? ஸோ கூலிங் சிஸ்டமும் இருக்கு, இதுல வந்து லூப்ரிகேஷன் சிஸ்டமும் இருக்கு, ரைட்டா? ஸோ இந்த டயக்ராம்ல உங்களுக்கு லெஃப்ட் சைட்ல இருக்கிறது எல்லாமே என்னது, லூப்ரிகேஷன் சிஸ்டம், கரெக்டா? அந்த மூவ்மெண்ட்ல இருக்கு இல்லையா? ஸோ த ஆயில் வில் பி ஃப்ளோஸ் ஃப்ரம் த சம்ப் டு த பம்ப் அண்ட் ஃபில்டர் அண்ட் த மூவிங் எலமெண்ட்ஸ், கரெக்டா? இதெல்லாமே என்ன சொல்லியிருப்போம், லூப்ரிகேஷன் சிஸ்டம்ஸ் அப்படின்னு சொல்லியிருப்போம், ரைட்டா? நெக்ஸ்ட் இந்த மாதிரி இந்த ப்ளூ கலர் வருது பாத்தீங்களா, இந்த ப்ளூ கலர்ல என்னது, இந்த ரேடியேட்டர், ரைட்டா? கூலிங் சிஸ்டம், கரெக்டா? ஸோ இன்ஜின்ல இருந்து நமக்கு வந்து the heat will be delivered to the cooling system, கரெக்டா? ஸோ இந்த கூலிங் சிஸ்டம் போய் நமக்கு என்ன ஆகணும், இந்த டெம்பரேச்சர்ன்றது டெலிவர் அவுட் ஆகணும். இந்த டயக்ராம் தெரியுது உங்களுக்கு, விசிபிளா இருக்காது, how the engine will work, how the cooling system will be there and how the lubrication system எப்படி இருக்கும், கரெக்டா? ஸோ இந்த மாதிரி தான் இருக்கும், கரெக்டா? இதுதான் ராக்கர் ஆம்லாம் நீ பார்த்திருக்க மாட்டேன், கரெக்டா? அதுதான் இந்த டயக்ராம் எடுத்து போட்டேன், ரைட்டா? உனக்கு ராக்கர் ஆம்னா என்ன தெரிஞ்சா, இப்போ உனக்கு அந்த வால்வ் வந்து ஓபன் பண்றதுக்கும் க்ளோஸ் பண்றதுக்குமே நமக்கு வந்து ஒரு ராக்கர் ஆம், இந்த ராக்கர் ஆம் புஷ் பண்ணாதான் நமக்கு என்ன ஆகும், வால்வ்ன்றது ஓபன் ஆகும் அண்ட் க்ளோஸ் ஆகும், ரைட்டா? சோ the rocker arm will be operated by the cam mechanism, ரைட்டா? அதான் சொல்லிப்போம் cam shaft, ரைட்டா? சோ நமக்கு இன்ஜின்ல இருந்து ரெண்டு டர்ம்ஸ் இருக்கு, ஒன்னு வந்து crank shaft, இன்னொன்னு வந்து cam shaft, ரைட்டா? சோ cam shaftோட ஒர்க் என்ன, crank shaftோட ஒர்க் என்ன? crank shaftன்றது நமக்கு வந்து இன்ஜினோட அவுட்புட், பவர் அவுட்புட்டை நமக்கு வந்து என்னது, இந்த கிராங்க் ஷாஃப்ட்ல இருந்து எடுத்திருப்போம், ரைட்டா? பட் இந்த வால் ஆபரேஷன் அண்ட் இந்த ஸ்பார்க் வந்து எப்போ நமக்கு வந்து ப்ரொடியூஸ் ஆகணும், இதெல்லாமே இந்த டைமிங், ரைட்டா? அந்த டைமிங் வந்து எது கொடுத்துருப்பாங்க அப்படின்னா இந்த கேம் ஷாஃப்ட், ரைட்டா? அந்த டைமிங் வந்து கிராங்க் ஷாஃப்ட்ல கொடுத்துருப்பாங்க, கரெக்டா? ஸோ நவ் யூ கேன் சி திஸ் டயக்ராம். இப்போ உனக்கு அந்த டயக்ராம் பார்த்தா ஒரு ஐடியா கிடைக்கும், கரெக்டா? ஸோ ஹியர் it is right. So here we have the crankshaft, right? So here we have the crankshaft, right? So the crankshaft and the engine parts, right, is the cylinder, right? So in the cylinder la நமக்கு என்ன ஆகும், in the valves, right, inlet valve and the outlet valve, right? So அங்க நமக்கு lubricating oils இருக்கும், right? Then the rocker arm, right? So rocker arm, due the rocker arm வழியா தான் நமக்கு என்ன ஆகும், இந்த lubricating supply pogum. Then the rocker arm, how it will works, right? It will be works by the camshaft, right? It will be works by the camshaft. Sorry, inga irukku camshaft. It will be works by the camshaft, right? So the camshaft and the crankshaft will be connecting by the timing chain or timing belt, right? So it will be worked by the timing chain or a timing belt, right? So adu enna pannirpaanga, lubricating. So what are the terms, right? What are the terms, right? So crankshaft and the camshaft and the wall mechanisms and the piston rings, right? And the piston pin, right? So ellame namakku enna pannirukkom, pin pannirpaanga, right? So the pins, right? A crank pin and the piston pin and the connecting rods, right? So what are the connecting rods, right? So the connecting rods ellame idhaan vandu namakku vandu lubricating irukkudiya parts, right? So most of the parts will be in the term of the lubrication in the engine, right? So what are the parts are lubricated in the engine? Then what is the lubricant, right? So நம்ம வந்து இவ்வளவு நேரம் நம்ம வந்து lubrication இருக்கு, lubrication தான் நல்லா இருக்கும் அப்படிலாம் சொல்றோம், right? So what is lubricant, right? So it will reduction, right? So lubrication is the reduction of the friction to minimum by replacing the solid friction to the fluid friction, right? So the friction may be arrest or the friction may be converted into some other terms, right? That term is called the lubrication, right? Right. So for example, if we have the two mating parts, right, the two mating parts have to rub each other, right? So we may get some frictional force and it may get some heat and it may get some wear and tear, right? So between these two mating surface I can put some anything, right? I can put some anything. So what will happen? So the friction, right, the friction will be converted into the solid friction into the fluid friction, right? So most of the lubricant may be a fluid one, either it may be a liquid or it may be some gas, right? It may be a liquid or it may be a gas, right? So what will happen? The frictional force will be converted into the solid friction to the fluid friction, right? So that fluid conversion term, the medium is called the lubricant, right? So the medium is called the lubricant, right? So the lubricant, what is lubricant? It's a very 2-mark question, right? So you may note, so what is the lubricant, right? By the introducing between the two mating surfaces, right? Two mating surfaces, there is some relative motion between the mating surfaces. So we can give some ideal film of oil or ideal film of the sufficient amount of the grease, right? Sufficient amount of the grease to keep in the two surfaces, right? To keep between the two surfaces, right? So it will be separates the two surfaces. It will separate the two surfaces, and what will happen? So here the friction may be converted. It may replacing the solid friction into the fluid friction, right? So that term is called the lubricant. That term is called the lubricant, and the lubricant will have some functional terms, right? So what are the functional terms are there in the lubricants, right? So the control friction, the control wear, the control temperature, control corrosion, and remove the contamination, and it will one, right? So these are all the functional terms in the lubricants, right? These are all the functional terms in the lubricants, right? So in this class we can stop here, right? So next class we can see the types of lubricants and properties of the lubricants and additives, that and all we can see in the next class, right? So in this class we can discuss what is the lubricant, right? What is the lubrication, right? That is a very a few introduction about the lubrication system. What is the lubricants, right? So why we have to use the lubricants, what is the need for the lubrication, right? What is the need for the lubrication, and the lubrication system functions, right? What are the functional terms there in the lubrication system, especially for the IC engines, right? The lubrication will be used in all the machines and the engines, right? So where and all the moving parts are there, so there and all we can use some lubrications, right? So especially we can see here for the IC engines, right? So in the IC engines where the lubrication will be used, then what are the parts, what are the engine parts will get some lubrications, right? So that parts, right? Then what is the lubricant and what is the function of the lubricant, that we were discussed in this class, right? So the remaining time will be see in the next class, right? So is it clear? It's a very simple one, right? It is a very simple one, right?